Well, hello. This is Tony Christ. It's August 14th, a little after 11 a.m., late in the morning. Uh, Today, we're going to talk about the interest rate, of all things to talk about. Um, I don't know if you are watching the podcast, if you watched the podcast at any times. This is our 40th topic. Uh, if you go to the website odysseyinvestments.info, Odyssey Investments, all one word, .info, and you look under opposed to the consensus, depress it, you'll see the 40 papers. The interest rate paper is being filed as we speak. The podcast will be up on the website. It's on YouTube also. Uh, so let's talk a little bit about the interest rate. Now, what is the interest rate? Well, it's the price of money, right? Well, what is money? Well, today that's a good question. Well, we're referring to the fiat currency that the United States government uses, and other countries, of course, have different fiat currencies, and they have interest rates attached to them. And if you wanted to, for lack of a better term, buy some money, you would pay the interest rate. Now, what would determine the interest rate? Why would the interest rate be, say, 3 or 4%, or why would it be 10%? Well, let me tell you, risk. So if it's a risky venture and there's no one that wants to lend at 3 or 4%, the rate will be significantly higher. Now, is that important? Yes, it's very important because it communicates what? It communicates to us riskfulness. So when you get a fantastic idea and you go to borrow some money and you talk to numerous people and the best interest rate you can get is 9 or 10%, well, they're telling you it's a pretty risky idea, right? By the rate. Now, governments have gotten involved with the interest rate, depending on what country. In more closed countries like dictatorships or communist countries, where the central government controls a lot, that's why we call it closed, the interest rates are pretty much controlled by the government. And they set the rates oftentimes. There is some variability. They do allow some market influences, as they do in America, but generally they're more controlled in a closed economic system. So they deprive you of that information about risk. Because if a government holds an interest rate artificially low, they're not changing the risk, okay? They're not allowing the interest rate to tell you it's more riskful. So oftentimes, it has been the case for much of this century, particularly during the period when Benedict Bernanke was sitting at the chair of the Federal Reserve, interest rates were held artificially low. Many people took out mortgages. Many of them still have them because the rates are very low. But they weren't really approximating the true risk at the time. And that's somewhat the case today. Today, the short-term rates are held higher. The long-term rates are beginning to dip again. The mortgage rates, of course, went up to 6.5%. And that's directly because the federal government stopped buying mortgages to print money. You know, they buy a mortgage and they put a computer entry in. Let's say the mortgage is $1 million. They put a computer entry in of the number $1 million, and that money fantastically is created out of thin air. Okay, well, they've stopped doing that. And that also led to interest rates going up even more significantly, which has put some level of pressure on the housing market as far as new borrowers, because not only did the interest rates go up, the prices went up 41% since Mr. Biden and Mrs. Harris took office. 41%. That's not a small amount. So the thing that they're doing currently is they're trying to restrict the interest rate, to curtail loans, to cause a slowdown, to have an influence on inflation. So they're definitely in the markets again, messing with the interest rate. Now, in an environment where the interest rate is not being messed with, and the central government or its appendages, like the federal, like the equivalent of a Federal Reserve, are not printing or contracting money in the system, and the money is growing at roughly the growth rate of the economy. You know, we grew at 2-something% last year. Let's say the money only grew at 2-something%. Well, that's not the case. 2 years ago, this suit of clothes, Mr. Powell, printed money and caused growth in the money supply to be 26 to 28%, not 2%, okay? Led directly to the inflation. Now he's trying to fix it. The problem he created, he's trying to fix. Okay, don't think he's anything but the villain that gave us the problem he's fixing. Okay, that's all he is. He's not anything more. Don't deceive yourself. And it's amazing to see all the market players and otherwise smart people every day hanging on to his every word, and they all are asking, when's he going to lower the interest rate? Well, had the government not messed with the interest rate and allowed the market to determine it, and had there been a steady amount of money in the system, the rates would have roughly reflected risk. They're not perfect, but they roughly would have reflected risk. Now, when you had rates being artificially held down by Benedict Bernanke during practically all of Obama's administration, even though Janet Wawa Yellen took over, she was just a clone of Bernanke. She was a little lapdog of his. And she also held rates artificially low. So that whole period, the Obama administration, they dealt with artificially low rates. And the irony is, Bernanke used to go to Congress and testify, and he would scold the United States Congress for borrowing money, yet he held the interest rates artificially low. Well, if you want an analogy, that's like having a bunch of 4 and 5-year-old children sitting at a table and putting chocolate chip cookies on the table and telling them they can't eat them and then going in the other room. So by holding it artificially low, the Congress for years was given the wrong message. And they, in effect, borrowed a lot of money. Now, also, the banking system was given the wrong message. They lent a lot of money to the borrowers, who were the US Congress, at artificially low rates, okay, that did not reflect historic interest rates. Now, let's talk for a minute about what is a historic interest rate. Well, if it's a real interest rate, it has to be positive. So, annualized, it has to be greater than the inflation rate. All right, so let's say you have a 2 to 3% inflation rate, and let's say you have a riskless loan. For example, a federal funds loan, a loan made by the government overnight for one night and then paid the next day. There's not a lot of risk in that one. Okay, at least there isn't today. There may become a lot more risk as time goes on, but right now there's not a lot of risk. So the risk premium is very low. But since it is a loan and it must have a positive value, let's say it should have a 1.5% positive value. And if you have a 2 to 3% inflation rate, well, that's 2 plus 1.5 is 3.5, or 3 plus 1.5 is 4.5. So that rate, that overnight loan that is totally safe, should be priced somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5% to have a positive rate of 1.5%. Of 1.5, and make it 1% just to illustrate the point. Then the loan should be priced at somewhere with a 2% inflation rate of 3% to have a 1% positive rate. Okay. If it's not, if it's priced at 2%, well, it's priced at the rate of inflation. So it tells you the money in real terms over the course of a year, you get no more than the inflation rate on your money. So it has no positive return. If it's priced at less than 2%, say 1, okay, if it's priced at 1%, and the inflation rate's 2, you're actually losing 1% a year because you're only getting paid 1%, and the inflation rate, the money value has declined by 2%. So we need to have the interest rate, if it's not being messed with by central governments, and there's only really one other government in the free world. Now, we're not talking about China and Russia and Iran at this moment, but there's only one other country in the free world that messes with their money more than us. It's called Japan. Okay, they mess with it more than us. And actually, it could be argued that in the last this century, ever since Benedict Bernanke, we've been modeling the way we mess with it after Japan. But we don't know where Japan's headed, obviously. And there are recent signs that they've had difficulties with it as the value of their currency's been in almost free fall. And they're trying to get back to a positive interest rate. And so the thing is, if you take the price of money and you make it 0 or negative, guess what? You encourage, well, you're borrowers. You encourage borrowers to borrow more because it entices them to borrow more. If they can get money at 2 or 3% and the inflation rate's 3%, oh my God, they're going to borrow a lot of money. But the money, when you hold the money there federally, that is, you keep printing money to quench the demand so that the market can't price it any higher, the interest rate any higher, then what you get is you lose the ability of the money to tell us we're not price setters. We just go and take interest rates out at the best price we can get. And it doesn't allow the market to tell us about the risk. But does it change the risk? No, it doesn't change the risk. The risk stays the same. So, so the funny thing is you can load up on interest and overpay or borrow twice what you normally would if there was a real interest rate, thinking that because the money is so cheap that the risks are less, and they aren't. Okay, so when government intrudes and they artificially repress it. Now, that's something that you saw occur, as I said, during virtually all of Benedict Bernanke's years. And he sat at the Federal Reserve. He had some silly notions. They called him Helicopter Ben. They gave him a Nobel Prize. I think he should have gone to jail for what he did to our currency. And worse than that, the two knockoffs, Janet Yellen and this guy, Jerome Powell, were disciples of his. And now they really sort of left Jerome Powell holding the bag. And he now is trying to act like he never has. And like I said, he created this whole mess, and he did facilitate tremendous borrowing, but now he's had to raise prices because of the inflation rate. Inflation rates come down recently, but we've also sacrificed something that we talked about under productivity for 2 weeks. Our labor productivity has gone to zilch. And that's what creates our wealth, not just pumping money in the system. So the messing with the interest rates, and you've got to remember when the Fed messes with the interest rates, it is the interest rate on their bonds. But you also need to know that they don't care what price they sell their bonds for. They have to sell them. It's the law. So every day when they come out and sell bonds to the public, if there's not available funds to buy them at a certain interest rate, they raise the interest rate. And if there's not available funds there, they'll raise it again. They'll raise it and raise. They could go from 3% to 10. They have to sell the bonds. And that hasn't been a problem in a system where you've had loonies like Jerome Powell pumping 28% extra dollars into the M2, which is a broad measure of money in the system. When you've had loonies like that doing it, it hasn't been a problem. But guess what? It's becoming a problem. It's becoming a problem very rapidly because of the debt and the fact that they had to bring interest rates up so sharply. And so basically, the interest rate has a very practical function in helping citizens in the private sector determine risks. And when the government comes in and messes with it, it gets distorted, but it doesn't change the real economic risk. It just changes the feedback, your ability to understand that risk, because you see an artificially low rate. And your tendency is to want to borrow or to want to borrow more than you normally would. And that's human nature. You can't help it. You don't set the rate. You're completely, when you're a borrower, you're completely at the whim of the lender, no matter what level you're talking about. And the lender will price it according to risk. And if there's an excess of money in the system, it will appear artificially less. So this is a huge determinant on efficient use of capital. If you're deprived knowledge of risk, that is, the cost of the interest is held artificially lower than it normally would be, you react differently. And it's usually not a good way, because eventually it's going to come home to roost. I mean, governments can't artificially hold risk down when risks are high. They can do it for a period of time, as you've seen in the last few years. And if economy is dramatically slow, it does put pressure on interest rates to come down for a short period of time. But only if an excess amount of money, printed fiat money by the government, is in the system. When that dries up or disappears, things go out of business, and it puts a strain on the system, the price of that money will come right back up into a higher interest rate, which will reflect scarcity in that environment. And the balance of it, I always thought that years ago, and actually even Greenspan, in his Greenspan, I call him, not Span, but in his first few years as chairman of the Federal Reserve, used to go by an old rule established by Volcker, which was they would not allow the money supply to grow faster than the real economy was growing. So that kept the number of dollars in the system at a relatively low rate. But later in Greenspan's years, he violated every rule he believed in anyway. That's why I call him Greenspin. He just spun around the opposite way, created the problems we had with the bubble in 2000, and it just didn't add anything, any permanent growth in his later years. He is positive as he was in his first years. But the thing to take away is the interest rate is a very important price for any society. And if you mess with it and you hold it to zero or make it negative, say you have an inflation rate of 3 and the cost of money is 2. Well, that's negative. That's negative 1%. Or as it is in many European countries and in Japan, the price of money is barely 1/4 of 1%. So they're actually have created negative money for quite a period of time, as is the case in Europe, although they're so slowly coming out of that period and putting I won't say it's a positive rate yet, but they're up in the above zero interest rate areas. And again, it's all a function of how much money your central government, it's fiat currency, they control it, puts in the system, and how and only in that context and what interest rates they're imposing, the central government. And in a real world, in a real economy, you want your interest rate to act normally. That is to say, you want it to be higher to reflect more risk than when a loan is being made in a riskless situation. And this is in conflict with a lot of political nonsense too, but it's the only real environment, real feedback to give feedback to help grow wealth and societal well-being is to have positive feedback from a real interest rate. So we're going to talk about it more. We're going to talk about the price of money again next week. We're going to have a much more detailed talk. And I could tell you one thing, this extended period of holding the price of money artificially low that we've had this century, and a blockchain is an amazing development, but it helps to explain the popularity of cryptocurrency. It always, for 50, 60 years, has explained the phenomenal rise of the price of gold, which prior to cryptocurrency, it was always viewed as a way to keep up with countries devaluing their countries notoriously, if you didn't know, or if you haven't heard other podcasts, devalue their currencies until they go out of business. We're in the later stages of that right now, America. We've had this century, Obama, Trump, and Biden, Harris have been working ferociously overtime to debase and devalue our money. And then we get something called inflation. We wonder where it came from because the same people are promising to get rid of it, right? Do you believe that? Of course not. You shouldn't. They're in a debasement mode. They don't give two hoots about whether you pay more or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. They're in an economic hole. They don't give two hoots. They'll tell you they're going to pay the debt, the Dems with higher taxes, the Republicans with higher business, but they don't give a hoot because what's the first thing you do when you're in a hole? Anybody know? You stop digging. None of them are stopping to dig. Put the shovel down and stop digging. I mean, is it that hard? None of them are doing it. So they're digging while they're lying to us and saying what they're going to do. We're going to charge the rich guy more and pay for our excessive digging, on and on and on. and we're just in a critical situation. In a few months, I will predict with certainty that whoever wins the election is going to face the realities of the years when they've messed with interest rates and they've been printing money this century way overboard, way off the charts. And there are certain realities to that, particularly the debt, which is out of control. So the interest rate's a very critical element in an open economy. We're half open. We used to be all the way open. We're half open because it communicates risk to risk takers in the private sector, and it allocates on the basis of risk. It allocates money, and when you have a central government that is messing with it and holding it artificially low or artificially high, it creates a lot of stress for the economy. And of course, the reason they're holding it artificially high is because they held it artificially low for 15 to 20 years, don't take any responsibility for it. It's like having a mass murderer try to solve his murders. It's crazy. Just the craziest thing in the world, how we turn to the guys that have created the problem and ask for a solution. And of course, the Congress, when they see artificially low rates, they borrow, borrow, borrow. The banks lend, lend, lend. The banks are upside down. The Congress has created a debt that is just unimaginable for future generations. And it's all due to to the interest rate and to their obsessive printing of more fiat money. And it's largely part of the reason that gold is going up and cryptocurrency is going up, because people realize that the government is messing with their currency and messing them up, messing their lives up, and they want to escape it. So they put money in those two groups of investment to get it out of being in pure dollars and to hopefully keep pace with the rise in prices. And had they had a real interest rate all along, I would predict almost with certainty that neither crypto or gold would have been so heavily invested in. And they're going to continue to be heavily invested in because neither political party is addressing the problem. But I predicted almost with certainty it will come out in spades after this election because it's such a large problem. It's going to start affecting our standard of living. It's very important that people understand it. Now, I hope you appreciate this little chat about interest rates. Your takeaway from it is real simple. An interest rate is what? It's the price of money. And the level of interest rate tells you what? Well, it tells you the risk involved. If it's a very high interest rate, whatever you want to borrow the money for is perceived to be more risky in an open market, unfettered by regulators. If it's a very low interest rate, it's perceived to be less risky. When the government holds interest rates artificially low, like they did on mortgages for 10 years, you load up on them, people probably overdid it. And we'll know in the next couple of years with that. We don't know yet. But consequently, the reverse medicine of raising interest rates, trying to constrict it, this is an odd sort of thing to do in an environment where the same knuckleheads, the Federal Reserve, have shot 28% more currency into the system. So they not only are trying to curtail loans or slow things down, they went on a printing binge I haven't ever seen in my life. It far away surpasses what happened in the 70s. And the 70s was not too good of a period either, but it was similar in some respects. So we're going to talk more about interest rates next week, the price of money. We want you to have a great week. We hope you have some takeaway from this. We really would like you to go to odysseyinvestments.info. If you don't pick us up on YouTube directly, and you can watch the video, but on the website under opposed to the consensus, depress it. The 40th paper is the interest rate. We want you to read it. Again, next week, we're going to talk about the price of money, which is, again, the interest rate. So have a blessed week. We hope you have a good week, and we look forward to seeing you next week. So I'm going to sit back in my chair in this pretend reality I'm at. You know, my office is so messy. That's why I want to, I'd rather be at the beach. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a blessed week. Bye.